Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference channel. My name is Jesse Day. Each and every week, we're bringing the VRIC to you with our series of expert online panels. We have a fantastic one lined up for you today. We've got Peter St. Onge, economist at the Heritage Foundation and host of the Peter St. Onge podcast. We also have Tom Luongo here of the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter and podcast. Gentlemen, it's an honor to bring you both together for this panel today.
Thanks for having us on, Jesse.
Yeah, same here. Appreciate it, Justin. Thank you.
Well, we are the VRIC. I want to talk about natural resources first and foremost at the top of the conversation here. What do you see today when you look at the commodities sector? As we're speaking right now, August 1st, we're seeing kind of carnage all across the markets. Copper and related stocks are down. Uranium's getting destroyed. The broad market seems to be falling. What are your thoughts on both commodities at present and the state of the broad market? Obviously, we keep seeing dips occur and people come out on social media proclaiming that here we go, guys, the whole market's going to crash and things always seem to recover. Where do you think we are right now? Is this a bubble? Do you expect it to burst? Thoughts on broad market, thoughts on commodities? Hit me with it, Mr. Peter St. Onge. I'll start with you.
So that's been the big question, I think, for the past few years, is that the market has sort of been levitating. The fundamentals have been saying that we're headed for a recession for a long time. And I think a lot of people have been caught out, people on all sides, Keynesians, Austrians, everybody in between. And I think what's sustained that, number one, was the trillions of dollars in stimulus checks. So those passed right through lower income people, but middle class and upper class saved those. And they've been living on that for a couple of years. Number two is the deficits. The deficits just absolutely exploded. This is typical after a crisis. There's a book about this crisis in Leviathan. At any rate, the deficits picked up the slack, and we've sort of been running on those on fumes. And then number three is personal debt, which has also been soaring despite higher interest rates. And so in a sense, we're Wile E. Coyote off the cliff. We have these massive government outlays that have been stopping us from falling. But I think pretty much everybody, even Keynesians, has been expecting the market to crash at some point, or the economy to crash, the market down with it. And the question is just, is it going to be a soft landing? Is it going to be hard? Is it going to be semi-hard? Is it going to be somewhere in between? In terms of commodities, the big two that I tend to look at in terms of, so for me, fundamentally, I'm interested in what are the indicators that tell us where we are in the cycle. Because if we know where we are in the cycle, then we can just go straight to momentum, right? You buy NVIDIA in one kind of economy and you short NVIDIA in another kind of economy. So the two sort of key commodities for me are gold and Dr. Copper. There, when we look at the price action, I would be very careful about investing into the broader economy based on what's happening with copper as a differential to gold. And, if you're trying to shelter and sort of lay low, gold actually does tend to dip early in market crashes, and that's because everybody panics and they just, they reach straight for cash. But I think if you are expecting that Wile E. Coyote moment to finally happen, then you probably want to be taking a look at gold. Gold's price movement, I think today it's down maybe 0.5% when the market's down, close to 2%. So, again, you have some liquidity moves, but fundamentally, I think gold will hold up quite well if we're going to finally have that Wile E. Coyote moment.
Quick break here, guys. Today's episode is brought to you by Copernico Metals. Now, regular viewers of my channel will be familiar with the entrepreneur behind Copernico. His name is Ivan Bebek. Now, although a young man in this business, Ivan's already created tremendous value for his shareholders in the past, namely with Caden Resources, which he sold to Agnico Eagle, and Keegan Resources, which became a mine now owned by Galiano Gold. Now, Ivan has surrounded himself with expertise from BHP, Newmont, and VRIC on his board at Copernico Metals. Check out copernicometals.com. Now back to the interview.
And Tom, your thoughts on the broad market and commodities at present?
Yeah, it's a mixture of all the things that Peter said, and I don't disagree with anything Peter just said. I, for the most part, have echoed those thoughts, saying that it's not going to be a technical recession because there's too much money floating around for GDP to contract when GDP is just gross national spending and not actually gross national output. Sorry, it's just, I'm kind of doctrinaire Austrian when it comes to that. and then I've been noting the situation in copper as well. The copper hit did a blow off top of 508 and has crashed since then. A lot of that has to do though with that was an unbalanced market in the same way that oil was incredibly unbalanced, where there were so many bears in the market like about 6-8 weeks ago that you couldn't help but expect a $15 pop in the price of oil. And the same thing kind of happened in copper. You had so many people who were so bullish on copper that, you had the same thing. You had the same kind of thing. So once you hit one of those emotional highs and lows and you have a futures market that's completely unbalanced, and the specs are out of control, and expect a crash. So I think the move in copper from that perspective is a little overdone. I think the move in silver has done the same thing. And I don't see silver as a precious metal anymore. I see silver as the Dr. Copper of the tech sector. So if copper is the doctor of the kind of classic industrial economy, then silver is the equivalent for the technology sector. And it's clear that with the pop in NVIDIA and their stick save yesterday to keep NVIDIA from throwing the worst one bar bearish monthly reversal I would have ever seen since like Enron, with a $15 move on Wednesday afternoon yesterday, which has then rolled over today now that we've moved into the next month. I'm expecting the following, which is very interesting, which is that the NASDAQ is now turned bearish. Is it a leading indicator that all the other indicators are going to go bearish? Or is it an indicator that one aspect of the market has been overbought, the NASDAQ, technology, the AI boom, which is all nonsense as far as I'm concerned? And is it a rotation into the Russell 2K, the S&P, and the Dow as a flight to quality on a global level? Because what I'm really now watching at the same time all this is happening is the massive move to strengthen the Japanese yen, which is unwinding now, massive, euro yen cross positions and carry trades and whatnot, which, people have been warning about and I've been warning about. And so this is as much a fundamentals play as it is, as always, to quote Martin Armstrong, a capital flow play. And those two things are fighting each other. Gold is caught in the middle. And lo and behold, when you look at all of it, the euro's down this morning. The yen is down below 150. If the yen closes the week below 150, it could easily go into the mid 140s. What happens if the yen goes to 140 or 138? Okay, and this is with the euro at 107.9 and $80 barrel oil, right? Do you expect oil to, do you expect the input costs on oil to drop into the 50s? I don't. So I'm thinking $75 to $85 on oil, possibly 90 if we start seeing commodity cost push inflation after a crash and stagflation in an inflationary environment. Credit deflation, commodity cost inflation. We have stagflation going forward because the Fed's not going to cut interest rates until they've fully destroyed the concept of the Fed put across the entire global market. Now we're starting to get it here in the United States. They still haven't gotten it over in Europe. Lagarde and Yellen are still playing yield curve control games and exacerbating this run into this safe haven trade into U.S. Treasuries. So it's a mixture of all this fundamental stuff that Peter talked about, which is completely correct. But then there's all the safe haven stuff as people start to go, okay, now where am I going to put my money? Now, everybody can't pile into gold. They can pile into U.S. Treasuries. They can pile into German bonds, which they have. And Lagarde is like breathing a sigh of relief because she's desperately tried to keep the 10-year German bond under 2.6%. So it's all a mess here. And to be honest with you, everything screams to me massive liquidity crisis. Like people are moving into the Dow. They're moving out of emerging markets. They're moving out of the NASDAQ. They're moving into U.S. blue chips. They're moving into gold. They're moving into the dollar. And they're moving out of speculative assets like the Nikkei and the Euro Stoxx 50 and all the rest of it. That's what it looks like to me. And if you factor that in with all the political uncertainty in the U.S., I think there's an October surprise on the front in the next couple of months. And so for that reason, I would actually be long commodities here at the bottom. I would be buying this copper sell-off. I'd be buying this uranium sell-off, but I'd wait for it to fully manifest itself as a bottom before you do so. But that's my instincts tell me that we're going to want to be long commodities on the other side of any liquidity crisis because people are going to rush into tangible assets. Gold will get sold first, then it will skyrocket, that kind of thing. I think we'll see a rally in gold up and through September. and then we're going to see a big pullback if there's any kind of collapse on the other side of that, in anticipation of, say, I don't know, Donald Trump winning the election and somebody needs to pull the plug on all the capital flow, which I fully expect to happen, because we don't have capital markets anymore. We have politicized markets. And so because of that, you have to factor that into all of your fundamental analysis. So that's where I think we kind of are.
Yeah, great summary from both of you. I want to discuss, you talked about political chaos, we could call it. We've also seen a lot of geopolitical uncertainty. Now, I think part of that is because of social media and the speed at which information travels. Now the world looks a lot crazier than maybe it's always this crazy, and we just didn't have 24/7 access to people with their phones filming people getting bombed in various parts of the world, etc. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the intersection between geopolitics, politics, and markets. You know, this kind of also ties into the whole BRICS versus the West theme, which has also gotten quite hyperbolic a lot of the time. How much of that is a real thing? Obviously, we're seeing the relationship between countries like Russia, China, Iran, etc., seemingly accelerate. The BRICS is talking about creating an alternate payment system. At least Putin mentioned that, outside of the dollar. We've seen Russia's reserves that were frozen, a portion of them get given to Ukraine now. How do you see all of this playing out? How will it affect commodities and markets? It's a very broad question, but I know both of you delve deeply into these topics, so you can take it wherever you'd like. And Peter, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so geopolitics, I think you're right that, the world has always been crazy. There was this famous line from, I think it was about 15 years ago, everything seemingly is spinning out of control. And that was from, I was trying to look up what year that was from, but in retrospect, it was a completely normal time. There was actually nothing happening. But, people always, the media survives on sort of building mountains out of molehills. But having said, what's concerned me, I think one of the most concerning things in the world right now is the game of chicken that's going on over Ukraine, where traditionally we assumed that our leaders were avoiding crises, right? That they were trying to fix the potholes and sort of good governance and trying to keep us safe and keep the crises away. They weren't always successful, but that was sort of the operating assumption. And I think when you look at what's happening in Ukraine, right, you've got weapon systems in Ukraine where you've got an American instructing them where to target. Some of these have targeted civilians, such as in Crimea. The only step between the U.S. actively bombing civilians on Russian territory is a Ukrainian guy who is being told which button to push. This is extraordinarily dangerous. And what scares me is that it is almost like they're seeking some massive catastrophe. Maybe they want to one-up COVID because it worked fantastic for the last time. Nobody got punished, right? They banked those trillions on COVID. They banked an election. So my concern at this point is that, true, everything is always spinning out of control. But I think what's new is that, particularly since COVID, the sort of merchants of crisis, they tasted blood. And, just like a wild animal, when a wild animal tastes humans, he graduates to a whole nother level. I think that in many ways, our governments have become a lot more predatory than people expect. And so, as Tom said, when we're trying to analyze what's happening in the markets, a pathetically small percent of that actually has to do with productivity and growth and, commercializing new technologies. A ton of it has to do with government priorities. So which federal bank painted itself, or which central bank painted itself into a corner, which government painted itself into a corner. What are they trying to achieve for the next election? And in this case, what I'm particularly concerned about is where they're trying to go with the wars. Now, BRICS, I see it more as a long-term project. They've been talking about introducing some kind of gold-backed currency for a long time. As an economist, I think that clearly has to be some external currency. They're not going to gold back the yuan or the ruble because that would devastate their exports. So it would be some sort of third-party, some sort of external gold rail that they would be looking at replacing the dollar. I think at the moment, China is very distracted with its domestic economic issues. Russia obviously has a lot on its plate. So I don't think that's going to be something coming in near term. But having said, when you contextualize that, for example, with Donald Trump announcing his strategic Bitcoin reserve, I think that the political Overton window is starting to shift back towards currencies that are backed. I think that if some credible country, meaning, perhaps Dubai, Singapore, maybe they're just enough to get there. If some credible country came out with some sort of gold-backed currency, ideally, I think that that could shake things up. However, I think in the near term, we're probably entering more like a 2008 period where countries all around the world are not looking at those sort of adventures in geopolitics. Most of them are just going to be trying to make ends meet and keep the people out of the street to preserve their government power.
Tom, your thoughts, take it away.
Yeah, this is a big one. Those are some what I agree with you in a lot of this, and let's start with the BRICS actually, and then we'll work backwards. I agree with. I tried to throw the water on this whole idea of the BRICS putting together some kind of gold backed thing. It will be a trade settlement currency or unit of account or whatever. It will not actually be a currency anybody trades in. It'll be a unit of account sitting on a on an Enbridge or something along those lines, which will allow them to settle up their trade differences on a quarterly or annual basis, and they'll have and it'll all be denominated gold, and then you'll see some gold move from one person's account to another. The question, of course, is who's going to be the trust agent there. I don't think it's going to be the BIS. I don't think it's going to be the IMF. I don't think it's going to be the United States. I think it's most likely going to be the UAE. Otherwise, they wouldn't have joined the BRICS last year. If you look at the 7 countries or 6 countries now that they added, all of them ring in some way all the classic maritime trade routes around the Arabian Peninsula. It's very important to understand that. And that was in August. And then in October, there was a flare up between Israel and Gaza. Just saying. Okay. Nothing is unscripted at this point in time. And so what we're seeing with the Russians in Ukraine, it is a kind of game of chicken. But the game of chicken has been who's going to go first, the EU or the US, to seize Russia's foreign exchange reserves and make a mockery of the entire post 1971 Friedman's nightmare that we live in, right? Because we all live in the competitive, as far as I'm concerned, competitively devaluating currencies should be known as Milton Friedman's nightmare. And so when you look at it from that perspective, that's part of the plan, as far as I'm concerned. With the people I see that are attempting to thread this needle of creating chaos and then wind up with all the power on the far end of it, as opposed to giving up that power and it exploding into a different world. That's what they're trying to do. I call them Davos. You can call them whatever you want. You can call them the British Crown. You can call them the American Empire. I don't care. Call them whatever you want. I happen to think those are all different factions. But it's the old colonial attitude of old Europe that absolutely wants the United States to fight a war in not only in Europe but in the Middle East and or Taiwan for their benefit. I've been scared to death that we're actually going to take that bait. Note in the last 24 hours what has happened. The massive prisoner swap between the United States and Russia this morning, right? Biggest one since the first Cold War. Big deal. Zelensky coming to the table and finally saying, yep, I'll come to the peace table and I'm willing to give up territory. It's almost like the puppet hand of Boris Johnson was removed from the backside of Zelensky finally. Like, seriously, folks, I'm, and that gives me hope that there are adults in the room in Washington, and even I dare say at Brussels, though I don't believe that, that rationality is going to come to Ukraine, because the Russians are going to continue to grind this thing out, a couple of thousand Ukrainian men at a time, even though they don't want to, because that's their only path to victory. They're escalating beyond what they've done. Where they are is not, that's what is wanted of them. So they're not going to do that. The same scenario in many ways is playing out between Israel and Iran. Okay. And yesterday we had, a major assault by Israel, by the Mossad, whoever was behind it, to take out the head of Hamas and the second in command at Hezbollah. This is, again, right after Netanyahu leaves the United States. These things are not uncoordinated. They're not unrelated. So And I know the Russians and the Chinese are trying to sit on the Iranians from doing anything dumb, like going off half-cocked. Unfortunately, Ayatollah Khamenei has said there will be a response. So at some point, this thing could get hot in a way that nobody really wants to deal with. I think Ukraine is may be being brought to a kind of steady state, but never ever think that means it's over. That just means that we're reloading. The Russians understand this, so they keep pushing. So with all of that said, when you stop to think about it in terms of what that means for the capital markets in the West, and what does that mean for, for what policy we can expect, the good news is that Trump, I think, finally understands most of this. I mean, him coming out and saying, "Look, I can deal with China, and Taiwan's not our responsibility. If Taiwan wants to be our responsibility, they can pay us for it." Great. By the way, TMSC is building unbelievable amounts of stuff out in Arizona. So Taiwan, as a geopolitical single point of failure, is ending. That period will end in the next couple of years. And most of what I understand, most of the talk about us going after China over Taiwan it's just military-industrial complex kind of jawboning to keep the gravy train running. And in many ways, you could look at Ukraine the same way. I'm telling you that the Europeans don't see it that way. They want us to expend ourselves there while they build their own military-industrial complex in France and Germany. Okay. They really do believe they're going to walk out the other side of this, cock of the walk, in charge of the world. They still believe this. I don't know why they still believe this, but they still believe it. Maybe that's because they don't have anything else to believe in because, well, they're communists. So, that's where I am on that. So what I would say is the following. I don't know that Trump can make it across the finish line, right? And everybody should be bracketing for about three Sigma events between now and election day. Not because I want to doom porn it up here. I actually don't. I actually think that one of the people literally been saying there are adults in the room trying to stop this, but I don't know that this train can be stopped. It's like the old Jeff Bell song, the train keeps coming and won't slow down. I mean, this is, I don't know what else to say. So I feel that that's the tug of war that's really at play here. There are big, huge implications of if the West does not collapse the way they want it to collapse. They want to collapse our current governmental system and our current currencies. They don't want to pay on the debts. They want to default on the debts. They don't know how else to do it other than take us to war and blame it all on our enemies, which is what they want. And I know we can get out of it otherwise. We can get out of it otherwise, and it has to do with gold, as Peter pointed out earlier, that everybody's going to have to make their move towards gold.
Interesting. I'm wondering how some would call it far left ideology, the woke mind virus, how that all plays into the Western elite, whichever group of people, whether it's Davos or the deep state, whoever we're talking about. Is this a tool that they're using, or is this just extreme ideology that's run out of control? I mean, obviously
maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, the opening ceremony of the Olympics obviously caused a lot of outrage online. I just thought it was ridiculous and kind of funny. But the fact that that's now being paraded as something that is mainstream and acceptable, if you want to go a little deeper, now they've got, they allowed a transgender athlete to beat up a woman in there, and apparently that's all fine and good as well. And this sort of stuff is kind of being pushed as normal and healthy. The destruction of the family unit, this whole pushing of the alternative lifestyle agenda, everybody wants everybody else to be able to do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting anybody else. But now you're kind of labeled a bigot if you're not for whatever they're pushing. Is this a part of their master plan, or is this just a general state of idiocracy that's pervading through culture? Peter, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's definitely intentional. Communism has always tried to attack the family. They've attacked gender. The term comrade is a standard, non-gendered identifier in communism. It's been that way for a long time. I think this is what we really saw during COVID, is that the long march through the institutions is just about complete. taken the Olympics, which used to be, very carefully non-political. Large companies used to be apolitical. They would avoid controversy. So, in the old days, Disney or Bud Light would have not touched any of those issues with a 10-foot pole. But at this point, we can argue what the points of leverage are. I suspect that BlackRock, shareholder advisories, right? That's a incredibly powerful little nexus in capitalism that has been captured. But really, they've captured everything across the board. I mean, we saw it during COVID, during the BLM riots, where, you had like the American Association of Actuaries cheering on BLM. And you're like, why do you guys have an opinion on these particular riots? But I think, really it started with capturing the universities. It was an intentional plan to use the universities to then propagate this mind virus into K-12. At that point, you can just set the clock and you give it another generation or two and you've got voters shifting over to the left. So I think that COVID really showed us that process is complete. What's happening in the Olympics right now, I mean, that's just the fruit falling off the poison tree. So I think it absolutely will continue. And, we're kind of at an interesting point where the establishment is doing everything that they can to censor or to shut, populists out of power, any sort of dissidence to this movement. We saw that in Europe, for example. And so the question to me at this point is that clearly the water is boiling. The frog is not jumping because it is being gaslit or because the instruments by which it might jump are being shut out. So things like in Europe, what they did with the, sort of union of centrist party to close out dissidents, that is just going to, I think, delay it. The water is going to keep boiling. And when the frog does jump, I think it's just going to end in a much bigger jump. And so, I think for all of us who love liberty, we would oppose right-wing communism just as much as we oppose left-wing communism. By the way, every time communism wins, it does go left-wing anyway. If you look at the Soviets or the Chinese, they would shoot homosexuals. So it always ends up right-wing anyway. And so my concern is that the way they're going, because they're not allowing that natural democratic pressure valve to work as intended, that we are headed for some kind of totalitarianism.
Very interesting. I'd
Yeah.
love to get your thoughts as well, Tom. It's funny because whenever these things are discussed, I discuss them on my channel as well. Sometimes people in the comments will say, "Oh, I was following this conversation until you started talking about conspiracy theory nonsense, and now I'm never coming back." So that kind of shows to what extent some people have been gaslit to believe, no, what's happening at the Olympic opening ceremony, for example, is a completely normal, natural, and positive thing. And you're talking about that it's some sort of conspiracy. How dare you? What are your thoughts on all of this, Tom?
Well, I mean, to those commenters, I said, well, these are the same people who staged the opening ceremony at the Olympics were the same people who burned down Notre Dame. Okay, like I don't believe for a second that Notre Dame just burned down. Like everything good and decent about Western culture has to be destroyed. Every institution, and I think it's deeper, far deeper than just the classic long march of the institutions and education and whatnot. I've been charting this in popular culture since I started writing publicly again in 2017. Like when I saw the backlash against The Last Jedi, and I saw how finally orchestrated all of that outrage on that side of Star Wars fandom was, I'm like, oh, they're going after Disney hard here. They need to destroy this thing as well, because there's literally nothing objectionable from a thematic perspective in any of the, again, other than you argue that the movies aren't particularly well executed from a script perspective, but not from a thematic perspective. Thematically, the whole trilogy is about the return of traditional male and female gender roles. Like, like, okay, now what? So that's like it's so unwoke, it's not even funny. But so I see it at every corner, and I've been really sensitive to it in every way. It doesn't matter where. They did the same thing with DC. They did the same thing, and Marvel was always a left-wing, CIA operation, because most of the comics industry was certainly going back into the 50s. Even the counterculture there was like, if you understand the history of comic books, you understand why Marvel Studios chose the Thanos cycle for the Infinity War. Why they understood that. So, and I need you to this is all a preface to, that was their plan. And then Have things got a little out of control? Sure. But these are people who hubristically believe that they can control chaos, that they can engender chaos and then control it. And when I'll say that is this, up until you destroy all of the institutions, you can get away with that because the institutions are strong enough to contain most of the chaos, and you're only playing within like half a sigma away from normality. And everybody then and then all the normal people course correct everything back really quickly through the political process. Once you get outside the 1 sigma barrier of normal behavior, once you start trying to normalize pedophilia, once you start trying to normalize, child mutilation, you don't have chaos that you can control anymore. You don't have realities that you can create, Karl Rove or Dick Cheney or whoever said that we then have to go follow along with. You're creating something that's so fundamentally trips everybody's disgust circuit that they just go, you know what? That's it. I'm out. And then you can't get them back. And I think they crossed that line during COVID. And they're now really beginning to see what it looks like downstream of that, and they're just in a scramble to try and to figure out what to do next. And to Peter's point, which was his final point, which is that we're going to see a rise in authoritarianism in the West, he's absolutely correct, because once all the other stuff doesn't work, once the gaslighting doesn't work anymore, all that's left is the power of the gun. All that's left is do it or I'll shoot you. Do it or I'll debank you. Do it or I'll deplatform you, or this, and everything else. And they won't be able to police the communication space by just deplatforming Gab or just deplatforming Alex Jones or Milo Yiannopoulos or anybody else. They're going to have to deplatform everyone. And then that becomes the very interesting problem of what happened when Elon Musk actually bought Twitter and changed the game. And I think that we're only having this conversation today because Musk bought Twitter. And that changes the entire calculus of how they have to react to our seeing them and debunking them in real time. Because without Musk and Twitter, owning Twitter, the intelligence services, all they have to do is go right to 4chan, where they've been for years, and to /poll and just seed every bad idea into the zeitgeist and then let it run. And that's what that was their modus operandi for years. That's how they memed into existence Donald Trump white supremacist during the 2016 election cycle. Started there. Those guys could see it like happening. But half of those guys that were part of the quote unquote white nationalist movement back then, all those guys were feds. Like this is how deep this thing has been going for years. And so now we see them. Now they're so ham-fisted about it, anybody can, the average person can see it. And when they wake up one morning and they watch the Olympics and they're like, okay, WTF, man, I don't get this. What happened here? This is not what I signed up for. And then to watch a woman get brutalized in the boxing ring. Yeah, no. And that's, I think, really at that yeah, no moment. That's enough.
Right. Now, speaking of tools of control, let's switch over to central bank digital currencies. Peter, you recently posted a video on X talking about the Thai government bribing voters with free cash in the form of a CBDC. This is a story that's widely flown under the radar. Talk to us about that story. And do you see this sort of incentive program spreading wider, coming to the West?
Yeah, so what Thailand did was they're handing out $300 to, I believe, every adult. And it's about a $14 billion program, which in terms of the Thai economy, that's comparable to about $800-900 billion in the US. So it's a pretty big program. But the kicker is that you've got to sign on for this. It's essentially a CBDC. So Thailand has been developing those for a couple of years. And in case listeners don't know, a CBDC is a type of cryptocurrency that's owned and surveilled by the government. It would look like just using a regular dollar, but all of your money sort of enters this giant spreadsheet where bureaucrats armed with machine learning can see what you're doing. They can block any kind of transaction. So it'd be like Justin Trudeau, what he did to the Canadian truckers, but here they could do it for every single dollar in existence. And what these people are trying to push is to replace national currencies like the US dollar with a version that would be invisible to the public. The public would still think it's the dollar, but they would be able to see and block any kind of transaction they don't like. If you're donating to the wrong candidate, that could give you extra scrutiny, or it could get the transaction blocked. And so my concern has been that, so CBDCs are very unpopular. There was a poll last year by Cato that found about 80% of Americans were opposed to this thing. You've seen similar polls out of Europe. Austria, for example, had nationwide marches against a theoretical CBDC. But the problem is if they pair it with a universal basic income, right? We saw that during COVID, where once they handed out the stimulus checks, just the opposition melted away, right? Oh, you want to ban religious services for the first time since the Peace of Westphalia? As long as I'm getting the stimulus checks, you guys go for it, right? We had measures that before COVID, people would have laughed you out of the room as a conspiracy theorist for suggesting that the government was going to do these things, right? Lock you in your home, arrest you for jogging on the beach, prevent you from going to religious services because allegedly if you sing, this is going to spread the virus. Riots, by the way, were okay. But that was something that nobody would have believed, right? But what fueled it, right? All of us, I'm sure, were sitting around saying, how in the heck are American voters going for this garbage? The reason is that they were paid to, and they were surprisingly cheap. I think the total stimulus take something like what, $4,000 or $5,000 per person when you add them up. So now if you pair that with a universal basic income where you're promising to give people, let's say $1,000 a month, and in return, all you have to do, you're going to get the money, but we're going to give it to you through this CBDC. You are going to shift tens of millions of Americans over to it. And then, you know, if you require the banking system to deal with it, if you give incentives to use the CBDC for people, you're going to bring people into it. At that point, we will have a totalitarian financial system where, I mean, literally a bureaucrat, you know, they could shift 10% of the assets of white people over to some other group. I mean, they could, you know, the sky's the limit. They could do anything that they want. And what concerns me here is that this is sort of a broader issue when it comes to liberty, which is that, you know, we know this meme, right? The hard times make strong men. Okay, so you know that meme, and that's something that's been around for about 1,500 years. It came from Polybius in ancient Rome, ancient Greece rather. And that, I think, has been the story of humanity. We go through good times, bad times, good times, bad times. Why don't we learn? And I think the issue is that the government can always put a giant finger on the scale, a giant fist on the scale, because as a monopoly of violence, it can use our own resources against us. Right. So it's not that you have two sides debating. You've got this giant force on one side of it who is bribing people into this. So, you know, we do it with student loans. We do it with the CBDC. So I think, number one, I'm concerned that a CBDC is absolutely coming. It's going to be paired with UBI. Number two is sort of the broader philosophical question. How on earth do we safeguard liberty?
Yeah, very well said. Tom, your thoughts on where we're at with CBDCs. I spoke to you last time on my show about it. You said you think ultimately this is a program that will fail. Do you see some sort of incentive program connected to UBI, as Peter's pointing out, as a potential way for them to push it through?
Yeah, and that is clearly what they want to do. They clearly believe that, you know, 80% of all people are useless eaters anyway, if you listen to the WEF and UHRR and the rest of them. So they're like, well, AI and the robots are going to like obviate most of the people. So what do we do with these people who will be functionally unable to work in our new economy? So we might as well just give them universal basic income and PS5s and hope that they don't, you know, and that they just, you know, and digital girlfriends, right? And all the rest of it. Yeah, it sounds like it works when you put it on paper, and then you actually, I don't know, you try and do it. And they tried it in Nigeria, it failed. They're trying it in China, and it's failing. Okay, I mean, they've already rolled it out. They already have a social credit system in China. They already have, and they're trying to roll out the digital yuan in China, and the Chinese keep buying more gold. Right. At the same time, the Chinese government is also encouraging them to buy more gold. So it's a very schizophrenic situation in China. Like, China doesn't want to add the gold to their reserves because they don't want to upset the global apple cart yet, but they want all the gold to flow to China. So that means that the China has to hold its gold to its people, right? Which is something that Vince Lanci and I have talked about multiple times on my podcast. So I mean, I like the whole central bank digital currency thing can be. I mean, I share every one of Peter's worries about this, and I know it for, you know, Absolutely. Does the European Union want to do it this way? Oh, absolutely. Christine Lagarde is like, what? Imagine being able to tell fat people that they can't eat broccoli. They can't order pizza and they can only eat broccoli. I mean, this goes back to 2017 with this woman. Like, you should only drink white wine because, green tea because black tea is too English or something. I don't know. Like, this is a French woman, like, setting policy for the world. Are you out of your mind? Like, okay, I mean, I get it. I get that she wants us to eat good food because she's French, but at the same time, there's never enough of it. Like, so this is a joke. This is my dig at French cuisine, which is, it's really good, but it's the cuisine of doing without, because France is always at war with someone. So, like, I don't see that every CBDC in effect has to become the same thing. I think we're going to see wholesale CBDCs. I really do think that FedNow or all the wholesale CBDCs, without a doubt, they're all coming because they have to compete with real cryptocurrencies, which are better than they are, right? I mean, simply put, this is just a technology problem, a technology gap where, Lightning Network and everything else is being built on Bitcoin, far superior to anything that we currently have in the T+3 settlement system that we currently have. So and the fact is that the back end of old Wall Street is unbelievably energy intensive. Between the people and the buildings and the commuting and the infrastructure necessary to keep all these people employed. Like, no, we can do all this stuff we can do 90% of the back office stuff with a blockchain and a relational database. Sure. So that's coming. The retail CBDC, I go to the University of Florida once a week for my gaming group, and wholly, completely in Florida, wholly and completely cashless on campus. You go to the student union, bring a credit card, because if you bring cash, you won't be getting a Starbucks, you won't be getting a candy bar. Okay. You can get water from the water fountain and you can go to the bathroom. That's it. But then what happens when the networks go down? Right. This is the same problem that we have with Bitcoin. So I don't know. Like, they're going to try it. They're going to try and force us into it. They're priming the kids with it, that they've never actually ever had hold cash and all the rest of it. We'll see. I can see different implementations of central bank digital currencies as long as they're not programmable. That'll be fine. If it's just something you want to use and not carry the digital money, I don't really have a problem with that, because I'm going to throw a wrinkle on the whole CBDC discussion now, and I'm going to tie it to gold. We are moving into a period where mercantilism will be ascendant. It is now happening. The BRICS are talking mercantilism. The Fed, for the U.S., for all intents and purposes, by deprecating both the LBMA and the COMEX as physical settlement area layers, they're going away, folks. You're going to be able to speculate on gold through GLD and silver through SLV, and in 5 years there will not be a COMEX or an LBMA where there's physical gold moving around. Those are only going to go through trusted intermediaries, JP Morgan, HSBC, whomever are the custodians for those things, and it's only going to be with the approval of the U.S. government. We're going to put soft capital controls on physical gold in the country. So how better, if you want to issue a two-tiered monetary system and close the U.S. capital account to have a domestic dollar and an international dollar, than by having a digital dollar backed by gold, or convert. For example, if we start moving, I'm probably getting ahead of myself here. If we have a restoration of how to fix the balance sheet of the United States through gold-backed tips, Judy Shelton's ideas, then, and if only Americans can buy them, and they can only buy them with the digital dollar, that's a way of creating a domestic dollar versus the euro dollar, which I think is absolutely what's coming, and it's absolutely what I think Jerome Powell is attempting to lay the groundwork for right now, which is why he hasn't cut interest rate.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a fantastic conversation. Yeah, no, I love it. That's one of your features, not bugs, Tom. So happy to hear your thoughts. Well, thank you both so much for coming on the show today. It's been a fantastic conversation. Before I do let you go, Peter, tell us about your podcast, where people can find it, and anywhere else you want to direct people online.
I do daily videos on economics and freedom. So those go up on X, also on YouTube, and I sum those up in a podcast, Peter St. Allen's podcast, every week. as to the interview with people, we talk about geopolitics, global economy, and I also have entrepreneurs on there talking about how they got started. So check those out. Peter St. Onge.
Great. I'll put a link in the description below. Tom, tell us about Gold, Goats, and Guns. What did you do there, where people can find it?
Sure. You can find Gold, Goats, and Guns at goldgoatsandguns.com, which is the public blog. You can find me on Twitter, TFL1728, where I do all the stuff, and I post a lot of the private stuff as links to the private stuff on a regular basis. But we do twice weekly market reports over at Patreon, which are 45-minute podcasts, 45 minutes to an hour podcast of technical analysis of the important markets like gold, silver, Bitcoin, and the rest of them, as well as the monthly newsletter where we have a portfolio. It's kind of classic retail investor newsletter portfolio, and all bespoke commentary as we try to look ahead as to what's going. We, of course, do the intersection of all of these things: geopolitics, capital markets, and culture, and try and figure out what's going to happen next, and then, make sense of it all.
Great. Well, all those links will be in the description as well. Thank you once again, gentlemen. It's been a blast. Really appreciated both of you coming on the show.
Thanks for having us on, Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse, and good to meet you, Peter.
It's great to meet you as well, Thomas. An honor.